Shalom, shalom, first and foremost. All praise, glory to Yahweh, Hashem, Yahushai. The honors to the elders, sing honors to the apostles, priests, and teaching. The word of truth with sincerity. Without any further ado, I'm just going to get into his lesson here. Just going to go into continuing in the breakdown. Yeah, so we're just going to continue. I'm going to continue where I was in Daniel 11. I think I left off in verse man. Yeah, I left off in verse 3 with the video going into how Alexander basically he did according to his will. He was basically spreading the Greek culture to other nations that he conquered. So this is Daniel 11. Now I gotta go into verse 4, and it reads, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and he shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his prosperity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for those beside those. This is going into the four generals and how they were fighting each other. The four generals of Alexander. Once Alexander died, you had something called the partition of Babylon, the first of the conferences and ensuing agreements that divided the territories Alexander gained. This leads to the wars of the Diadochi. And the territories of the empire became satrapies, divided between senior officers of the Macedonian army and some local governor and rulers. Yes, so at first you had a lot of governors, a lot of rulers, probably a couple hundred. And then it ultimately leads up to four of the main generals that knew Alexander and would have been close to him. It says you also have the partition of the Triparadisus, then another partition, and then the following years lead to the Diadochi Wars. The three generals who allied with Seleucus, which this is going into the Diadochi Wars more later on. Seleucus. Yes, the three generals allied with Seleucus during the Diadochi Wars are Ptolemy, Lysimachus, and Cassander. Yes, all three were original generals and close companions who campaigned alongside Alexander the Great, and they were the last final ones to remain after the end of the Diadochi Wars. Yes, and so just so you know as well, after the Diadochi War, you have the first Syrian War, the first Syrian War, then the second, then the third, then the fourth, fifth, sixth, and then in between the fifth and sixth, you have something else, another different war called the Roman Seleucid War. So you had many wars, man. Different names for these wars. But the main one that's dealing with is basically the six Syrian wars, and then it mainly deals, and then after that it mainly just deals with Antiochus and the Maccabean revolt, and the end of it, and the end of it. So it says here. Yeah, and this, yeah, these are basically after the Diadochi Wars. You had just have basically, mainly it's Antiochus and Seleucus fighting each other. Really, that's what it is. Just it's just Antiochus and Seleucus fighting each other, going back to back. So yeah, here's a photo of Ptolemy, one of the four generals. He was Alexander's childhood friend and one of his seven elite bodyguards. They called him the Soma Top Phylax. He became the ruler of Egypt and founded the Ptolemaic dynasty. Then here's a photo of Seleucus. Seleucus knew Alexander the Great personally. He was an officer in Alexander's army and commanded an elite infantry unit, the Hypaspistae, during the campaigns into Asia and India. Then you got Lysimachus, another Alexander's close bodyguards who saved the king's life by fighting a lion single-handedly in India. He secured control of Thrace. And then here's a photo of Cassander, one of Alexander's regent, and Antipater. He served as an officer and cavalry commander, eventually seizing control of Macedonia. And then here's a map of the territories during the Diadochi Wars. As you see, you have Antigonus there, and then you have Seleucus there. Don't get those confused. But basically, Seleucus ends up killing off and defeating Antigonus. And then that's all you have left: Cassander, Lysimachus, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. But ultimately, Ptolemy and Seleucus are the last two that end up with those same territories. And then Ptolemy is the last Greek Edomite standing. So it says here, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken, and shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven, and not to his prosperity, nor according to his dominion. For his kingdom shall be plucked up, even for others beside those. Yeah, the four generals, it says, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken. So when Alexander died, his kingdom was broken up. That's why it says his kingdom shall be broken, because it was divided by the four generals. It says, and shall he be divided toward the four winds of heaven. Divided toward the four winds, meaning his four main generals. He had many though. Yeah, when you go into it, he had more than four generals, but those are the last four that remain. That even in secular history, that they'll show you. They'll show you, and then basically just deal with mainly those four, because those were the last four that really actually kept a vast territory of Alexander. It says it shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven. But mainly mainly they would at first it was more than four generals and governors over these as you see in this map, over the various chunks of this map, and before you get the war against Antigonus. But yeah, once again, those are mainly the last four that took control. And then it says, it shall be divided toward the four winds of heaven. Heaven here meaning the earth. Because there's one heaven is the Earth, the second is the space, the galaxies, where you get other where you can go to other planets, outside other planets, and then you have the fourth dimension, we call it, which would be the third heaven. The sixth dimension, whatever you choose, you can call it. So it says Alexander's empire was broken up upon his sudden death in 323 BCE. His generals, known as the Diadochi, fought over the vast territory for decades. The empire ultimately fractured into three major Hellenistic kingdoms. Yeah, I think the last three that remain is we'll look at. I'm pretty sure I have it. I'll say it more on down. Upon Alexander the Great's death in 323 BCE, his massive empire was immediately carved up into over 30 administrative regions, satrapies, each assigned to a specific general or governor. These rival successors are collectively known as the Diadochi. Because Alexander left no clear heir, these generals fought a series of brutal civil wars for 40 years. By the time the dust settled, the fractured territory stabilized into three primarily powerful dynasties. While the territory changed hands several times, historians traditionally focus on the four major successor kingdoms that emerged. Yep, and that's Ptolemy, Seleucus, Antigonid, and then the kingdom of Thrace in Asia, which was Lysimachus here. Ultimately, yeah, Cassander ends up dying off, and then Lysimachus is the third one of the four left, which ends up being ultimately just three of them left. So Lysimachus, Seleucus, Ptolemy will end up being the last three there. Yeah, because Cassander ends up getting taken out pretty soon after, before this first Syrian war even ends up start popping off. Cassander's already killed ultimately, and then you have those, and then you still have those Laodiceans and Macedonians and other armies of near Greece there that take control of that. And then the Romans come in and they take control of Asia and Thrace, Turkey and whatnot. And then basically Ptolemy and Antiochus or Seleucus ends up being the last two. So yeah, it says while the territory changed hands several times, historians traditionally focus on the four major successor kingdoms that emerged: the Ptolemaic Kingdom, Egypt, ruled by Ptolemy, which became one of the longest-lasting and wealthiest of the successor states. The Seleucid Kingdom, Mesopotamia and Persia, ruled by Seleucus, which was the largest in land mass, stretching from the Mediterranean to the borders of India. Antigonid Kingdom in Macedonia and Greece, ruled by Antigonus and later his descendants, which controlled the traditional Greek homeland. Yeah, because I think it was actually Antigonus' son that ends up taking over Asia Minor, or what is that, Asia Major? Oh, so like, never mind. I mean Greece, or maybe not. Don't quote me on that. Yeah, because Cassander had Greece, Lysimachus had Asia Minor and Asia Major, if I'm not mistaken. Those two are of the same area there near Turkey. Modern day Istanbul. And then, so yeah, Yeah. They get taken out pretty quick. Cassandra once again, and Lysimachus, they get taken out pretty quickly, and then betrayed as well. I think by Seleucus, and there's basically a lot of backstabbing that goes into that when you go all into that, and so yeah, because basically yeah. Oh, that's the point there. Because you have many people, once again, the governors that ruled those areas, once again, that was governing those areas, like many various parts of Alexander's land after he died, but basically those are the last four that remained. And I think Antigonus also knew Alexander as well, but he's not considered what part of the four. So just to fall in line with prophecy, those four are Lysimachus, Cassander, Seleucus, and Ptolemy. Just try not to think too deep about it, but this is a precept. First Maccabees 1 chapter 1 verse 1 to 9. It says, and it happened that after that Alexander son of Philip the Macedonian, who came out of the land at Shittim, had smitten Darius king of the Persians and Medes, that he reigned in his stead, the first over Greece, and made many wars, and won many strongholds, and slew the kings of the earth, and went through the ends of the earth, and took spoils of many nations, and so much that the earth was quiet before him. Whereupon he was exalted, and his heart was lifted up, and he gathered a mighty strong host, and ruled over countries and nations and kings, and became tributaries unto him. And after these things he fell sick, and perceived that he should die. Wherefore he called his servants, such as were honorable, and had been brought up with him from his youth, and parted his kingdom among them while he was yet alive. So Alexander reigned 12 years, and then died, and his servants bare rule, every one in his place. And after his death they all put crowns upon themselves, so did their sons after them many years, and evils were multiplied in the earth. Yeah, so right there, once again, going into that part, it mentions the four. It mentions that he called his servants and parted his kingdom among them. Yep. Daniel 7 and 6. After this I beheld, and lo, another like a leopard, which had upon the back of it 4 wings of a fowl. The beast had also 4 heads, and dominion was given to it. Once again, the 4 generals, and also in Daniel 8 and 8. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and when he was strong, the great horn was broken, and when he came up, 4 notable ones tore the 4 winds of heaven. So now we're going to speak a bit on the Diadochi Wars. It says here, the Diadochi Wars, 322 to 281 BC, were a series of devastating civil wars fought among Alexander the Great's generals. The Diadochi Wars. The wars are generally divided into 4 main conflicts, marked by shifting alliances, massive territorial swaps, and betrayals. And this fits right in line with Genesis 27. How Esau was going to be blessed with the sword. And like the brother mentioned, when we tried to break this down together, which wasn't as orderly as I expected, because it was just confusing to break it down with 2 people. So, but as he mentioned, Esau's blessing was the sword, and this is really when you see that his blessing was coming to pass, because of how much killing Esau was doing to get his fatness of the earth, which was his promise to him. He would be blessed with the sword, and that he was going to get on top, but not without shedding much blood. So this is Genesis 27 and verse 38. And Esau said unto his father, Hast thou but one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, all my father. And Esau lifted up his voice and wept. And Isaac his father answered and said unto him, Behold, thy dwelling shall be the fatness of the earth, and of the dew of heaven from above. And by the sword shalt thou live, and shalt serve thy brother. And it shall come to pass, that when thou shalt have the dominion, that thou shalt break his yoke from off thy neck. Yeah, because when you go into it, before the Greeks come into the scene, which through Alexander, ultimately, you had a process, and before Alexander came to fulfill the blessing for his nation, the Edomites, they were taken down by us as well. When, particularly with King David, and when we had certain kings as well, they were taken down by those kings in war. So basically, once we got taken from off that land and brought back, but under servitude, under tribute, Esau came into power, and he was having a lot of war too. This is in 41, and Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing whereof his father blessed him. And Esau said in his heart, The days of mourning for my father are at hand, then will I slay my brother Jacob. And this is going into the first war of the Diadochi. It says, triggered when Regent Perdiccas attempted to consolidate too much power and marry Alexander's sister. A coalition of generals, including Ptolemy, Antipater, Craterus, and Antigonus, rebelled. Perdiccas was assassinated by his own troops in Egypt. The second war in 319 to 316 BC, sparked by the power vacuum following Antipater's death. Eumenes fought to defend the nominal royal family, Alexander's infant son and mentally disabled brother, against ambitious regional warlords like Antigonus, who ultimately emerged victorious in Asia. So that was the second war of the Diadochi. Because when you go into the Diadochi wars, there was many wars basically, but they just call it, the historians just call it the Diadochi wars to label it one in one nutshell. Basically, this is the third war, 315 to 311 BC. Antigonus' growing power terrified the other governors, Ptolemy, Cassander, which, by the way, that same Cassander killed Alexander's son. So once again, just going into how Esau lived by the sword, and you had how they also had a lot of betraying happening within these Edomites. It says, so Antigonus' growing power terrified these governors. Ptolemy, Cassander, and Lysimachus formed an alliance against Antigonus. It ended in a stalemate, officially recognizing Antigonus as the master of Asia, but acknowledging the other generals in their respective territories. So basically, they just decided to have peace and leave each other alone. It says, but Antigonus lost a massive amount of territory during the third war of the Diadochi, 315 to 311 BC. Although he entered the war as a dominant warlord controlling almost all of Asia, a coalition of rival successors forced him to surrender vast eastern regions and his vital coastal holdings. Yeah, I think this was Seleucus as well, who ended up teaming with Ptolemy, Cassander, and Lysimachus. The East, Babylonia, and Persia. Seleucus, the first Nicator. Still speaking on the same Seleucus earlier. It says it's just his full name was Seleucus, the first Nicator. Capitalized on the conflict and to reclaim Babylon following his victory at the Battle of Gaza in 312 BC. Seleucus pushed eastward, effectively stripping Antigonus of control over Babylonia, Media, and the rest of the upper satrapies. Yeah, I think Seleucus here ended up getting most of his territory. Demetrius I served as a young leading general for his father Antigonus I Monophthalmos. Yeah, that's still the same Antigonus, by the way. That's just his son Demetrius, or Demetrius led a disastrous military campaign against Seleucus, defeated by Seleucus at the Battle of Gaza. Demetrius failed to stop Seleucus from taking Babylon. This loss forced Demetrius and his father Antigonus to formally accept a peace treaty that permanently established Seleucus' Eastern Empire. Here's a map of this. What Seleucus had and what Antigonus kept. Then you got Cassander or Cassandros and Lysimachus or Lysimachos, and Ptolemaeus. It says their name's a bit different here on this map, but that could be the actual way you say it. So now I got this clip I want to play.
At the same time, knowing things were about to get tough in the east, Antigonus began negotiations with Cassander and Lysimachus. At the same time,
So like about the video, how I don't know why my phone does that with maybe it's the app audio recorder, but yeah, it's basically sorry, excuse the audio, it's pretty crappy.
Knowing things were about to get tough in the east, Antigonus began negotiations with Cassander and Lysimachus. At the same time, his satraps, Nicanor of Media and Euagoras of Aria, mustered 17,000 troops and moved to meet him. Flush from his victory in Babylon, Seleucus mustered 3,000 infantry and 400 cavalry. They moved into the marshes of the Tigris to intercept these two satraps before they could link up with Antigonus. When Nicanor and Euagoras arrived on the banks of the Tigris, they were unaware that Seleucus was still around. He thus ordered his men to camp for the night. Seleucus waited until nightfall, then pounced like a tiger upon Nicanor's poorly guarded stockade, engaging in a mass slaughter. Euagoras was killed in the commotion, causing the Persians under his command to change allegiances. Nicanor fled with a few remaining allies, leaving Seleucus to take over Media and Elam. While the havoc in the Orient was occurring, Antigonus was busy with negotiations. Ptolemy was brought into the discussions with the other Diadochi, resulting in the conclusion of a treaty known as the Peace of the Dynasts. Per its terms, Cassander received Macedon and Thessaly, and was permitted to put garrisons in Greek cities, which were now seen as independent by all kings. Lysimachus continued to own Thrace, while Ptolemy consolidated control over Cyprus and Egypt. Antigonus was left with the rest, but his core of control was centered around Phoenicia, Asia Minor, and Syria. It was also agreed that Alexander IV, son of Roshanak and Alexander III, would take over once he came of age. However, seeing the son of the great conqueror as a threat to his rule, Cassander decided to act, ordering him discreetly slain and his body hidden. Thus passed the son of Alexander, grandson of Philip, and the last king of the Argead dynasty, which had ruled Macedonia for centuries. Roshanak perished as well in a foreign land. This tragic and unceremonious end is a testament to the brutality of Hellenistic politics. Cassander did not announce the deaths of Roshanak and Alexander IV publicly, fearing retribution, and thus continued to claim to rule as regent on behalf of Alexander's bloodline.
So there you go. You had a lot of backdoor stuff going on there. Yeah, so basically that that war that just described there in the video is a part of a part of the third war of the Daidochi, basically. But basically it's ultimately really just the end, if I'm not mistaken, of that Daidochi war. The Babylonian War is essentially, yeah, that was called the Babylonian War. But that war with Seleucus versus Antigonus there. The Babylonian, which happened during, I think, during the third war of Daidochi, or at its end, I think. I'm not sure. I didn't double check that. My bad, but yeah, if it's in your spirit to check that again, double check that, you can. This is the Babylonian War is essentially a localized offshoot in the concluding chapter of the third war of the Daidochi. So now this is going into the Babylonian War here. And I got this video I want to play first about the Babylonian War. $16, $15.
While Seleucus was absent from Babylon while Demetrios' army marched upon it, he had left a trusted commander, Patroclus, in command of the defense of the city. Patroclus' garrison likely numbered a few thousand men, though our sources do not clarify the exact manpower he had at his disposal. As Demetrios' armies marched into the satrapy of Babylon and drew closer to the city itself, Patroclus resorted to two strategies. One was guerrilla warfare, in which his men struck out from various hidden positions, attacking the army as they marched to Babylon proper. The other was similar to Seleucus' siege of Babylon, with Patroclus ordering the flooding of the irrigation canals of the region to delay Demetrios' advance. Ultimately, these measures only slowed Demetrios down, and eventually the invading army managed to reach the city of the Gate of the Gods. Ahead of Demetrios' arrival, Patroclus had ordered the city's civilian population to flee and restricted his defense to the city's defensible citadel. Demetrios entered the city without any resistance and then organized his troops to besiege the city. The length of the siege is unknown, but we do know that Demetrios broke through and plundered one of the city's citadels. Nevertheless, the defenders persisted. After concluding the Peace of the Dynasts, Antigonus called on Demetrios to return to the west. Demetrios did as bid, leaving his second-in-command Archelaus with 6,000 troops to continue the siege. However, news from Persia brought hope to the defenders. Seleucus had solidified control over parts of Persia, with many local satraps now backing him. Thus, he stormed back west to his beloved capital. Entering the satrapy with many troops, Seleucus pushed Archelaus out of the city. After a campaign of reconquest, he managed to convince the enemy troops to defect to his side, forcing Archelaus to escape back to Syria. We know little of what happened during the escape. What we do know is that after hearing the reports from Demetrios and Archelaus, Antigonus decided to sort the matter out personally. Seleucus was becoming too entrenched and powerful, and thus he had to be stamped out before he solidified control over Persia and Babylon's endless wealth. Thus, like Alexander's patron god Dionysus, Antigonus resolved to journey east and bring the upstart Seleucus to heel.
We live in the middle of nowhere. We don't even get pizza delivery out here. This is my Instacart story. I run a 20-acre donkey farm. Between homeschooling the girls,
Antigonus resolved to journey east and bring the upstart Seleucus to heel. To ensure his success in the eastern campaign to come, Antigonus invested heavily in personnel, amassing up to 75,000 troops. He likely began his march in late 310 BCE and moved through the Near East into modern-day Iraq. Seleucus must have been aware of the coming onslaught, but decided to remain in Babylon. On the 19th of January 309 BCE, Antigonos appeared on the outskirts of the city. This time around, the defenders of the city did not hold themselves up in the citadel, but garrisoned the entirety of the city, leaving no part of it for the invaders to occupy. Seleucus himself had taken up a position in a command center in the citadel, where he could survey the entire city. The siege began, and after an initial struggle, the Antigonid forces were able to break through the defenses and enter the city, whereupon Antigonos allegedly pillaged its sacred temples. However, this may be an anachronism written by later authors seeking to character assassinate him. Slowly, the overwhelming numbers of Antigonids fought their way through the streets, pushing the Seleucids back into the citadel. Here our record becomes very patchy. We know that Antigonos tried to take the citadel multiple times, but ultimately failed in each attempt. Eventually, he decided to retreat from the city, but continued to roam the countryside. Knowing that the threat was too big, Seleucus chose to abandon Babylon in an organized and tactical retreat. This was so that they could regroup and change tactics if needed. Antigonos seized upon this opportunity, and after a long and Pyrrhic struggle, which had seen his army sustain heavy losses, he seized control of all of Babylon, declaring himself master of the city. Subsequently, his subordinate Archelaus was installed as a satrap of Babylon in order to bring control to the unruly region. As records mention that there was much misery during this period, we can assume that Archelaus was not kind to the conquered natives, exploiting them heavily for plunder. At some point before March 2nd, the retreating Seleucid army reached the nearby city of Kuta. Antigonos pursued them and besieged the city, causing the Seleucids to abandon Kuta and continue their retreat. Pushing his mortal enemy further and further into the depths of Inner Asia, Antigonos seemed poised to solidify control over the heart of Mesopotamian knowledge and civilization. However, Seleucus soon reorganized his forces and began a campaign of guerrilla warfare against the Antigonid invaders. These asymmetrical attacks are not recorded, but they must have caused mass chaos among the enemy. An enraged Antigonos, possibly thinking the locals were on Seleucus' side, or that the Seleucids were getting supplies from the natives in the region, resorted to the most ancient and brutal of counterinsurgency tactics, terror. He proceeded to burn the countryside and cause mass destruction, which likely only emboldened locals against him. However, Antigonos' burning of the land ultimately forced Seleucus to come out of hiding and fight a conventional battle once more. Antigonos still had a numerical advantage, but Seleucus was determined not to go down without a fight. The two titans were now set to clash with one another in a classic Hellenistic field battle, though in the end it was cunning and treachery that would decide the war. The two armies ended up facing each other on August 10th, 309 BCE, or in the Babylonian calendars, the 25th of the month Abu. This battle survives in the historical record only through a short account by the 2nd century Greek historian Polyaenus. Nevertheless, it was possibly the most important battle of the Babylonian War. We don't know where the battle took place, but it likely occurred somewhere near Babylon. Moreover, the sizes of the Antigonid and Seleucid armies are unclear, but we can surmise that both had around the same number of troops that they had during the Third Siege of Babylon, with Antigonos leaving some in Babylon to make sure the city was under his control. The armies probably faced each other in similar Hellenistic formation and fought to a standstill. The battle lasted the whole day, but the turning point actually occurred when night fell, and the soldiers returned to their camps to rest. Antigonos ordered his men to disarm, dine, and then retire for the evening. Seleucus, in contrast, ordered his men to rest in full armor and battle formation. Then, before dawn, he ordered his men to take formation and march. As the dawn started to give way to sunrise, Seleucus' troops pounced and attacked the unprepared Antigonid encampment, whose soldiers had yet to arm and armor themselves. The ensuing massacre was likely massive. Despite scrambling to take up arms, the Seleucids were strong and fast. As a result, the battle ended in complete defeat and heavy casualties for Antigonos, though we have no clue about the number of dead on either side. This was most likely the last battle of the war. After this disaster, Antigonos was forced to withdraw his remaining troops from Babylonia and return to Syria. Seleucus was triumphant and returned to Babylon, reclaiming the city. On the heels of his military triumph and the reconquest of his capital city, Seleucus was finally able to establish his kingdom, with Babylon as the first of its many capitals. While not one of the main players in the initial stages of the war, Seleucus had succeeded in establishing his own empire and dynasty, the Seleucids. He was now free to turn to the Orient and conquer the remaining satrapies up to Bactria.
When people talk about
So yeah, that's the Babylonian War. And I'm gonna stop here and continue this again another day. Lord willing, it's edifying. Shalom. Bar.